What is up, everybody? Happy Wednesday. Welcome in to an all-new episode of the Pack-A-Day Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Guys, it is draft time. I am so geeked up going through all of these prospects and going through these deep dives. It's just one of my most fun times of the year. I hope it comes through in my voice and in my overall presentation of just how excited I am to go through some of these players, whether they're my cup of tea or not my cup of tea. I don't really care. It's just, sort of fun to break them down and to see what some of these players could potentially bring to the Packers. And then, of course, it's going to be that much more fun when we actually go through the draft and then break them down even more once they are Green Bay Packers. So just a beautiful, really fun time of year, and hope you guys are enjoying all these great breakdowns, not only the ones that I'm doing, but of course, Ross Uglum on the Daily Draft, and then our entire Draft Day crew over on the audio side of the podcast as well. If you're not checking out all of those, there is so much Pack-A-Day podcast content that is getting you guys all set and ready for Draft Day. So make sure to check all of it out. Give those 5-star reviews. Make sure you're looking into the Pack-A-Day podcast YouTube memberships, all of it. Just do all of it because it's amazing, and I know you're absolutely going to love it. Speaking of things I'm hoping that you're absolutely going to love, let's go through some real quick announcements here. As I've been talking about, we've got the Timber Rattlers game coming up, not this Friday, but the following Friday, April 19th. $10 gets you a ticket to the game and a 1-hour live Q&A with yours truly. That should be really, really fun. Looking forward to that. So not only do you get the ticket, you get to see me hilariously try to throw out the first pitch, and you get that live Q&A as well. So great deal for just $10. I will put the link in the show notes per usual. Also, night 2 of the NFL Draft, Badger State Brewery. I am going to be there for a happy hour for about an hour and a half. Then I'm going to be going home to do night 2 of the draft on YouTube. But Ross Uglum will continue live in person at Badger State Brewery. So make sure to check out that event. That is free to get into. Enjoy some Badger State beer. Enjoy the draft there. And of course, like I said, I will be kicking it off and then handing over to Ross after that. So Pack-A-Day Podcast, Packer Report, and Badger State Brewery. What more could you want on night 2 of the draft other than if you want to watch from home? And I have options for you there too. And as I've announced before, I'm going to be doing full live streams on night 1 and night 2 of the draft. Night 1 is likely going to be just me. Night 2, I am so excited to announce that Maggie Loney will be co-hosting with me. We will have some other special guests lined up as well, but super excited about that. And then I will do something on day 3, but that will likely be for members only. So again, make sure to check out those Pack-A-Day Podcast YouTube memberships. All right, that does it for announcements. I do want to go over one piece of news, I should say, from Tuesday, and that is, it seems like we're getting closer finally to this Packers-Brazil decision and if Green Bay will play that opening game in Brazil against the Philadelphia Eagles. Mark Murphy's comments from the tailgate tour seem to indicate that it might be trending in this direction. There's been some buzz that the announcement might be made on Wednesday, so maybe when you're listening to this, the announcement's already been made. We'll see if Green Bay gets chosen for Brazil. I go back and forth. I think the downside is you're adding travel to your schedule, which is never really quite an ideal thing. The good news is that you've got a little bit more rest time going into week 2 because you're going to have a Friday game. So even if you get back Saturday and then are a little bit, you're not playing a game on Sunday. So you're still going to likely play, unless they play Sunday against the team that played Thursday, you're likely going to have a rest advantage in that week 2 game. And then you're really taking away a home game for Philadelphia and turning it into a home game for Green Bay. They're going to play Philly at some point in the season. If they do play them, it will be on the road, unless it's in Brazil, which at worst is going to be a neutral game for Green Bay, and in all likelihood will almost be like a home game for Green Bay because we know that Brazil has a ton of Packer fans and we know Packer fans travel so well. So there are some advantages, there are some disadvantages. I think you take the good with the bad and you move on, whatever the decision is. I think Green Bay will be able to navigate it one way or the other, but hopefully we get some word on that rather soon, and maybe as soon as Wednesday. And like I said, maybe you guys listening to this already know what the verdict is, and if it is Green Bay or if it is Cleveland playing Philadelphia in Brazil Friday night to open the season, day 2, actually, the day after that Thursday night opener. But either way, should be really interesting to find out. And also the schedule comes out in a month, so that will be really unique and interesting as well to see how that all plays out. All right, enough about that. I want to talk draft, and I want to get into Kool-Aid McKinstry because this is another really, really fun player to break down. And I'm just geeked to get into it, so let's get into it. It is time for some Kool-Aid. All right, so is he a Packers type? Let's start there right away, first and foremost, because Spoiler alert, if he wasn't a Packers type at all, I probably wouldn't be doing that deep of a dive into him here on my third prospect profile. But let's go into it. There are question marks here, as there have been basically for everyone. There isn't, as I've sort of been talking about, this 1A perfect glowing example of a Packers fit and prospect that we can just say, yep, that's the guy at 25. But McKinstry has a lot of things that Green Bay will like and a couple things that are going to be question marks. Let's start with that relative athletic score. He has a 7.55 relative athletic score. In addition to that, it's an incomplete relative athletic score. He did not do the bench press, and he did not do any of the agility testing, which is always very important for Green Bay. So it's a 7.55 with an incomplete score due to not having either those 3-cone short shuttle or the bench press done. Green Bay, as we've talked about, has been in a huge role taking players 8 or more in relative athletic score. I think it's 11 consecutive times, and I think 12 of the last 13 have been relative athletic scores over 8. And under Goody, these are first round picks I'm talking about here. It has been all relative athletic scores over 8 since he has taken over for first round picks. This is a 7.55. It's not egregiously bad. It's not completely under that 8. They have taken, since that Aaron Rodgers pick, players in this range with a 7.55 relative athletic score. So I don't think that this is something that disqualifies. It's not like he's got a 2.1 relative athletic score. It's a 7.55. It's a good score. But if Green Bay thinks that his agility testing was not going to be good, and if they think his bench press was not going to be good, like that could all weigh into it. That relative athletic score, and I'll say this every single episode, I know Green Bay's not going specifically off of relative athletic score, but it's been a huge indicator. If that all of a sudden would bring that down to a 6 or a 5 or a 4, it makes it far less likely that Green Bay would spend a premium selection in the first round on a player that doesn't have that extreme athleticism. So it's a 7.55, but it is incomplete. He does come from a power conference and obviously a big-time school in the University of Alabama. They love young players. He is only 21 years old. He will turn 22 in September, so he has that going for him. And he does play a premium position as well, playing that outside cornerback spot, very premium position, and certainly a position that Green Bay has valued quite a bit. Unfortunately, too often, because a lot of these guys have not worked out, but they've spent a ton of draft capital on outside corners, first, second round guys in the last, decade and a half. It's insane. So definitely a position that they value quite a bit. So fits there as well. As far as the cornerback traits that Green Bay specifically looks for, they look for a 3-cone in 7 seconds or under. That's an incomplete. We don't know what McKinstry would have tested in that because he did not test in the agility drills. They like their corners 190 pounds or more. He passes that. 4.6 40 or less. He passes that. He ran a 4.47. And then they like their corners 5'10 and 7/8 or bigger. He passes that as well. He's 5'11 and a half. So everything else he passes. The two big question marks here are the overall athleticism and the agility testing. Those are the two that sort of stand out. His explosive numbers as well, his vertical and his broad jump, which Green Bay also usually likes those numbers being pretty high, were pretty mid. So again, that's a minor question mark here as well. If you're looking for this extreme first round athlete that Green Bay generally loves, McKinstry doesn't quite jump off the page that way as a big time high end athlete. We'll talk about his relative athletic scores and break that down just a moment here, but that would be the big question mark as to whether or not Green Bay would be willing to put the 25th pick in the draft into a player that doesn't have that ultra high athleticism. And at least, I don't think there's really questions about his agility. I think his agility is good, but they just don't have the scores on it. So those could be legitimate questions for McKinstry and legitimate questions for the Packers as to whether or not they would value McKinstry at pick 25. As far as fit goes, I think a couple things worth noting here. Green Bay did bring him in for a top 30 visit. It could be that they're checking on his injury, which we'll talk about. Could be that they wanted more information. Could be a smokescreen, or it could be that they're legitimately very interested in him. As I've mentioned, top 30 visits are usually an indicator under the Brian Gutekunst era that they do have legitimate interest in the player. So there's that. Goody also specifically attended the Alabama Pro Day himself. Now, this isn't like one player that was doing a event at a small school and you just go for that one play. Like there's a lot of Alabama players that are going to be going in this draft. And Goody, I'm sure, got a look at some of those players outside of McKinstry, but it certainly doesn't hurt that he got a really quick, or not quick, but a really close look at Kool-Aid McKinstry at the Alabama Pro Day. And again, brought him in for a top 30 visit as well. He's an outside corner. We know that Green Bay takes a long-term approach to the draft. So you might be looking at the depth chart and saying, outside corner, they have, and I know Justice Mosqueda views outside corner not as a need, but we know Green Bay doesn't care about that. And a great example is edge last year. They got Rashawn Gary, they got Preston Smith, and Igbari's on the team. They go spend a first-round pick on Lucas Van Ness. Like they sign Preston Smith and Za'Darius Smith, and they draft Rashawn Gary. Like they don't care. They look long-term, and they're going to look for a premium position that's a high-profile player. And at corner right now, again, you could look at Eric Stokes, Jair Alexander, Corey Valentine, Carrington Valentine, and say, they have 4 outside corners, and they've got Keyshawn in the slot. They've got 5 corners. Do you really need to spend a first-round pick on a corner? But I do believe that this is not only a long-term need, and you can look at it this way, in 2025 right now, Jair, Valentine, and Nixon are the only corners under contract. And Jair does have a sneaky sort of out in his contract next year if Green Bay doesn't see the Jair that they were hoping for coming off that 1-game suspension. The Jair relationship was a little bit funky and weird last year. Maybe that's better in Jeff Hafley's system. We will see. But if things don't go right there this year, they do have an interesting out in that contract next year as well. Either way, Stokes is a free agent. Ballantyne's a free agent. And the other thing we have to look at here too, while this may be looked at as more of a long-term approach need, we really need to look at this position in the short term. Jair, as we talked about, has not been quite the same Jair over the past season and a half that he was in his all-pro seasons and things like that. Now, hopefully we get that bounce back and hopefully this scheme is a better fit for him. And we see the A-plus Jair, which would be amazing. That's what we're all hoping for. But Eric Stokes, the injury issues and his play on the field when he has played the past 2 seasons has not been anywhere near a starting caliber corner. Carrington Valentine had a nice rookie season, but it's really easy to trick yourself into thinking, well, that just means they're going to be good moving forward. Quentin Rollins and specifically Demarius Randall had solid to good rookie seasons. Eric Stokes had a good rookie season. That does not confirm and guarantee that they're going to take that step in year 2. It does not all of a sudden just mean Carrington Valentine's good to go, set it and forget it as your outside corner going into this season. Corey Valentine, nice season a season ago, but he projects as your number 5 or 6 corner all day, every day. And we saw that he's able to step up and play, and that is a huge benefit of having him lower on your depth chart, that he can step in and play. That's awesome. But you want him as a core special teamer. You want him as a, in case of emergency sort of guy where he can legitimately step up and play. But you don't want to go into the season feeling like, Corey Valentine's going to have to play a ton of snaps. And that leads you to the opposite of Jair still being a question mark, whether we really want to think that Stokes is going to bounce back or that Valentine's just going to be the guy. That could be the case, but it could not be as well. And Nixon, they signed to the 3-year deal, but we know that there's some coverage limitations. Maybe there's a world in which your opening, starting 3 would be Jair and McKinstry and Nixon in the slot on, opening downs, and then Valentine goes into the slot, or Jair goes into the slot and Valentine goes outside on obvious passing downs. There's different ways that you could match this up as well. So this to me is a short-term need and a long-term need, which is why this could be a fit for Green Bay. Lots of unknowns at corner and how they're going to arrange them and how they're going to play them. And we'll get into the scheme fit as well, but just as a spoiler here, McKinstry, a very strong scheme fit for what Jeff Hafley will likely be asking him to do in Green Bay. Let's get into the deeper dive breakdown here. 5'11 and a half, 199-pound cornerback out of the University of Alabama. He is a true junior, 21 years old, as we mentioned, turns 22 in September. He was considered the top cornerback in the 2021 signee period, coming out of high school, going into college, and was a 5-star recruit, was ranked as a top 50 overall recruit by 3 different publications, was considered the top player coming out of Alabama. That is noteworthy. The top high school player coming out of Alabama was Kool-Aid McKinstry. He helped win 3 state championships in 4 seasons at his high school, was a first-team All-American in college in 2023, a two-time first-team All-SEC in 2022 and 2023. And as I mentioned, he is coming off of a Jones fracture in his right foot. He did not participate in the combine, but did participate in his pro day. Does seem like it's trending well. Does seem like he's doing way better, but noteworthy as well, he did have that Jones fracture at the end of this past season. Statistically, in 2023, he had 32 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, no sacks, no interceptions, 7 passes defended, no forced fumbles, no fumble recoveries. Fairly pedestrian stat sheet, but we'll go over that in just a second here, more from a coverage standpoint when we get to the PFF breakdown. In his career, he had 93 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 2 picks, 23 pass breakups, no forced fumbles, no fumble recoveries. He also had 35 punt returns in his career for 418 yards, 11.9 yard average, which is really good. No touchdowns as a punt returner in his career, however. From an athleticism standpoint, as mentioned, a 7.55 relative athletic score, did not do the bench or the agility testing. Tested 66th percentile at corner in height, 86th percentile in weight, 49th percentile in the vertical, 58th percentile in the broad jump, 78th percentile in the 40-yard dash. His split times in the 40-yard dash do not make sense, to the point where I'm wondering, did something go wrong? Was there a malfunction? Because it is that crazy and weird. He had a 99th percentile 10-yard split. A 99th percentile 10-yard split, which shows first step acceleration. How do you go from 0 to 10? And he is there faster than almost any cornerback in the history that has done those drills. However, he was only, it doesn't make sense. It does not make sense. He was only a 18th percentile 20-yard split, which means in the first 10 yards, he was one of the fastest corners to ever do that test. But in the next 10 yards, he had to be one of the slowest corners to ever do that, because in the 20-yard total, he was only an 18th percentile corner in the 20-yard split, which just does not make sense when you're in the 99th percentile for the first 10 yards. It doesn't make sense. And then overall, he's a 78th percentile in the 40-yard dash. So what this is telling you, if this is real and legitimate, is that he is superhuman for the first 10 yards, slow as hell for the next 10 yards, and then super fast again for the last 20 yards. And that's what you get in the 40-yard dash with Kool-Aid McKinstry. Evaluate that how you will. I don't know what to make of it, but apparently the big one to look at here, if true, is the 10-yard split. And overall, whatever we look at that, he ran a 4.47 40-yard dash, and that was a 78th percentile 40-yard dash. But those splits are freaking weird. All right, PFF, 2021, first year as a starter, 67.9 grade, 479 snaps. Let me just say, to come in as a freshman and play 479 snaps at the University of Alabama in the SEC and have a positive 67.9 grade is impressive. Comes back his sophomore season, 82.5 grade on 872 snaps, and then gets better again in his junior year in 2023, 88.8 grade on 848 snaps. So better year over year, and continued to play at a very high level. Played a total of 2,199 career snaps on defense. In 2023, PFF graded him 83.0 in run defense, 78.7 in tackling, 82.7 in pass rush, and 87.8 in coverage. So he was good at everything per PFF. He had 2 total pressures, an 8.1% missed tackle rate, which is very good. And then in coverage this past season, here's the big numbers. 19 of 39, 48.7% completion percentage, 205 yards, 1 touchdown, 0 picks, 1 touchdown, no picks, 4 pass breakups, a 73.1 passer rating, and no penalties. That's pretty freaking good. 205 yards allowed only, 48.7% completion percentage, only 1 touchdown, 73.1 passer rating. His career coverage in 3 years at Alabama, playing in the SEC, 70 of 146 when targeted, 47.9% completion percentage for only 800 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 picks, 21 pass breakups, a 66.0 passer rating, and 7 total penalties. By the way, that 0 penalties this past year, super impressive. In total, he only played 28 snaps in the slot, 168 in the box, 4 at safety, 1,981 as an outside corner. He is an outside corner. As far as the big boards go, Daniel Jeremiah currently has him 36th on his big board. PFF has him at 23rd. ESPN has him at 33, and the consensus big board has him at 24th. So that's where he currently stands, right in that Green Bay Packer pick 25 range, if they are in fact interested in Kool-Aid McKinstry. Here is the big thing before we get to strengths and weaknesses. And if you take away one thing from this breakdown from Kool-Aid McKinstry and what I was ultimately impressed by, it is this. When I first watched Kool-Aid McKinstry's tape a couple weeks ago and broke it down, there is a decent amount of stuff on tape that gave me like legitimate concerns. I saw him get beat deep. I saw him have some speed issues on the back end. I saw him, you just watch it and there's times where he's getting beat more than you would expect a corner of his magnitude that's considered to be taken in the first round to get beat one-on-one. Just pure one-on-one. It's him versus the other guy, and the other guy's just beating him. For example, Adonai Mitchell from Texas had a couple big-time plays against him. There's just some things that make you like really almost be like, man, is this going to be somebody that's going to be able to hold up in the NFL? Like, I have some concerns. But what is so important that if you're going to go through and watch, even like so few obviously have the time and effort and energy to go and watch the tape in and of itself and watch and have access to the all 22. But even if you do, it is so easy to fall into the trap of just watching it, seeing it, and putting it down on the paper. Yep, he got beat here, he got beat here. This is what happened. But you have to look at the whys. Why was that happening? And is it correctable? And what was the story behind it? And here's the big key thing from Kool-Aid McKinstry. He was put on an island. What he was asked to do was go one-on-one on his own without any help, with no safety net, with no literal safety behind him. He was on an island. Now, I want you to take that piece of information, knowing that he was on an island on his own without much help and going against some big-time SEC wide receivers, Adonai Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, Malik Neighbors, Thomas from LSU. We can go on and on. There are a ton of big-time players that you go against, no matter if it's not, even just, we know the type of receivers that are coming out of college these days. He's asked to consistently go one-on-one, man-to-man coverage in the majority of the occasions with some of these top receivers on an island with no help. Now consider that with the fact that his career coverage rate, he's 21 years old right now. So at ages 19, 20, and 21 in college, he went 70 of 140, or quarterbacks went 70 of 146, less than 50% completion percentage, 800 total yards in 3 seasons, only 3 touchdowns allowed, 2 picks, 21 pass breakups, a 66.0 quarterback rating. With him being on an island in the SEC against some big-time top wide receivers. That's what he was asked to do. So yes, there are plays. He's given up 800 yards. He's given up some big touchdowns. You will see that on tape. But when you put in the entire scheme of things of what he was able to accomplish at Alabama as a young player on an island with no safety net, those numbers are amazing, tremendous, spectacular, whatever adjective that you want to use. And that's what you really have to put together. That's the piece of the puzzle that when I just watched him at first, because I've seen people be like, Kool-Aid McKinstry to the Packers at 25, and I'm like, oh, like go and watch some of the tape and you're going to get really scared really quick. But when you put the full body of work together and what he was able to accomplish while being in that system and asked what he was asked to do, you can see very quickly why teams are really interested in Kool-Aid McKinstry. And let's go over those other strengths, because there are a lot of other strengths to discuss here as well. The fact that he can play man-to-man coverage, press man-to-man coverage, and has so many reps doing so, that is not something you see a ton of in college football anymore. So when you actually get a player who has that experience and has that man coverage ability, That's a bit more rare. There is a bit more of a premium put on players that have those snaps and can do it at the level that McKinstry's been able to do it at, specifically in the SEC, specifically against some big-time wide receivers. But not only that, a lot of these man-to-man cover corners who've played predominantly man-to-man and press coverage, they don't have the zone ability. They've done so much of the man coverage that maybe they haven't played a ton of off coverage. The crazy thing about McKinstry is he looks natural as a man corner and he looks natural as an off-ball zone corner. He looks completely natural doing both. So you can press him, you can put him in off coverage, you can put him in zone, man, cover 2, cover 3, cover 4, whatever is needed, and he will play it for you. But again, the fact that he has that man-to-man coverage ability coming out of college and so many reps in the SEC at a high level of doing it is super attractive to defensive coordinators and GMs that are drafting for a defense that is going to be playing more man-to-man coverage. Spoiler, that's what we're expecting out of Jeff Hafley's defense. Not all or maybe even predominantly man-to-man coverage, but a lot more than what we've been used to seeing under Joe Barry's scheme. Next up, he battles for everything in coverage, meaning, yeah, you know what? You're going to beat him sometimes, but a lot of times if you beat him, he's going to get you to the ground right away. Or sometimes you beat him, but it's when I talked about in the past of like, I'm ready to see some of these Green Bay corners get beat and just tip my cap to the wide receiver and say, hey, great job quarterback on the other side. Great job wide receiver on the other side. The corner played it great. You beat him. Tip of the cap. There was some of that as well where, yeah, yes, he got beat. There was a completion. It was deep, but McKinstry did everything in his power and played it perfectly. And it was just better offense. That will happen from time to time, but he battled for everything and made everything complicated and everything difficult for opposing offenses far more often than not, which is indicative of that completion percentage and what he actually gave up in college. Battles for everything. Has that perfect defensive back mentality. He is super calm, poised, confident, and you're not going to rattle him. Even if you do complete a big pass against him, it's not going to affect him on the next play. And he is ultra poised when he is in phase, meaning when he's in coverage, yeah, he gets a little grabby at times, but it's more of like a physical grabbiness. It's not like, I don't know what to do, I'm panicking and grabbing him. It's not that. It's just him being physical with the wide receiver. What he can get away with, we'll have to talk about that as well, but it's not a panicked, I'm going to grab you and just, I don't know what's going on. He is so poised. Sometimes he's a little bit too poised. We'll talk about that as well, but he's got all the cornerback mentality traits that you want in a top end corner. He plays bigger than his height. I was shocked. I was shocked that he was not like at least 6 foot, 6.5 or even 6'1" when after watching the tape and then going and looking at his measurables, just how long he is. He feels like he's 6 feet, 6'1", and he's just, again, he's a little over like 5'11 and a half. He plays much bigger than his size. And like I said, I thought for sure he was going to be 6 foot, 6'1". And so I was very surprised when he was under 6 feet. But on the tape, it does not feel like that. It feels like he is much bigger than what he is listed as. Next, he has an incredibly high cornerback IQ. He has route recognition. You can tell he puts in time in the film room because there are times where he is running the route for the wide receivers. There are a couple dig routes where he is just on top of it. Like literally he breaks before the wide receiver on one specific dig route. It is uncanny. He has all these tricks of the trade. He knows what he can get away with. That is a veteran corner maneuver, also on the offensive line if you're playing offensive line. But there is a trick of the trade of knowing what you can get away with and what you can't. Meaning there are little tugs, little pulls, little nudges, little jams, little things like that, past 5 yards that refs aren't going to call. And he has a unbelievable feel for what he can get away with. He knows how to read the wide receiver's eyes. Wide receiver's eyes get big, the ball's coming. He knows how to key on that. He knows how to communicate at a high level with other defensive backs in his own defensive backfield. How nice does that sound after years of miscommunications on the back end? He's a high-end communicator. He uses the sideline to his advantage. He, and again, just seems very well studied, well prepared, and knows exactly what's coming from some of these, route combos and just experiencing so much from what he did in his 3 years in college. It paid off, and you could see him grow in the 3 years that he was at college, year over year over year. But all those little tricks to the trade and cornerback awareness things, he's got all of them at his disposal at age 21, which is fun to think about. Very battle tested, as we talked about, goes against players like Adonai Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, Malik Neighbors, amongst others. So he got to see some big time wide receivers. He will flash some ultra aggressive tackling and run defense. It will flash. There's some inconsistency there that we'll talk about. We always talk about wide receivers stacking corners on go routes. Like wide receiver gets past the corner. What that means is, so you're running a 9 route or a go route as a wide receiver and you get past the corner. What you don't want to do is run parallel with them. You want to get in front of that corner and then have it so that the corner is trailing you and they don't have access to your hands. Like you're stacking them, meaning you're stacked one behind the other. So you want, as your wide receiver, you want to stack the corner, meaning you're running parallel with them. Then you have the speed to get in front of them. You stack them. You've got that separation and then can go make the play. There are times where you see Kool-Aid stack the wide receiver, where he's running the route for the wide receiver, stacks the wide receiver and goes and makes the play. Now, only 2 picks. I think that's something that he can improve upon. But overall, the fact that he can do that even is impressive in and of itself. Does have some punt return ability. I don't think he's going to be a primary punt returner if he ends up in Green Bay, but he does have that at his disposal. Always nice to have more things that you can do for the team. And the big thing here too is I think he can play either left or right corner. Sometimes we see corners that are just a left corner, just a right corner. He played both sides. He will be able to continue to play both sides in the NFL as well. Weaknesses, he has that 4.47 40, which tests great. He doesn't play up to that speed on tape. There's sometimes where the speed on the stopwatch doesn't necessarily match up with what you see on tape. I would have guessed that he was more of like a 4.55 40 guy. It's not bad. He does not have bad speed. He has good speed. He does not have elite speed. He does not have, the complete makeup ability where, like Eric Stokes in his rookie season, that 4.3 40 time. The Jamar Chase play I talk about all the time. Jamar Chase gets by him, open down the field, and Burrow slightly underthrows it. And because he does, the 4.3 speed of Eric Stokes gets back in the play, knocks away the pass, and has that makeup ability. You don't see that all the time from McKinstry. 4.47 is a really good number for him, and that shows that he maybe has a little bit more there than what we saw on tape at times, but it didn't always match up, and there were some plays where he did get stacked, where he did give up some big plays that you wish he just had a little bit more of that elite high-end speed. Although I will say, if he had that, he would not be in discussion at pick 25 for Green Bay, but I digress. Tackling is inconsistent. There are times where he plays hair on fire, goes make some big-time plays. I know PFF had a really good run defense and tackling grades on him. He does not miss a lot of tackles. That I'm not concerned about. There are some times where he seems a little bit more willing to maybe just stick to the wide receiver and kind of go down the field rather than rallying to the football. There are times where you will see him jog to the football rather than rallying to the football. So there's just some inconsistencies there, and it's a little bit of an adventure with McKinstry. There is that aggressiveness with his hands, and I do think that's going to lead to more penalties in the NFL. I don't think it's going to be egregious. I don't think it's going to be something that he can't overcome, but the 0 penalties last year is not realistic. That is going to go up in the NFL because he does get a little bit grabby throughout the route and after that 5 yards. My next question is, does he project as a high-end number 1 starter? He doesn't have that elite athleticism. There are some questions about that elite speed and the makeup speed. He will get beat by some better wide receivers and some faster wide receivers. He doesn't have slot versatility. So is he like a true high-end number 1, or is he just a good, solid starter? Which isn't bad. Like, you need really good, solid starters. And sometimes that's better than what you get a lot of times at pick 25. So you're not upset by it, but we know that Green Bay likes to go big game hunting in the first round. Does that match up with what they're looking for? Just an interesting question to ask. As mentioned, Adonai Mitchell ate him up pretty well. Inconsistent in run defense. We talked about that. Times I'd like to see a little bit more urgency to his game. I talked about how he doesn't panic and he's super poised. There are times where I want to see him be like, yeah, it's great that you're confident and it's great that you're calm and it's great that you're not panicking, but also the ball's in the air. And can we just have a little bit more urgency of getting our head turned around and locating the ball and trying to make a play on it? Because sometimes it looks almost lackadaisical. It's not. He's working hard, but it's almost like he's just kind of like, yeah, I got this. But I think sometimes he just needs to play with a little bit more aggressiveness, a little bit more, not panicked, not just urgency, just a little bit more urgency to his game at times. Does struggle with some high-end speed with wide receivers and some better route running ability. How will he handle playing on an island in the NFL if Jeff Hafley does want to put him one-on-one on the outside, can he hang? Because we saw him struggle against some better wide receivers in college when he did get in some of those situations. So I think that's going to be a question he has to ask, or he's going to have to answer, I should say. He does lack that versatility, meaning he's an outside corner. He is an outside corner all day, every day. He's not a slot. There's no safety versatility here. It's either left outside corner or right outside corner, or a little bit of both. But he does not have a ton of versatility, and only the 2 career interceptions despite 2,200 career snaps with no forced fumbles, no fumble recoveries. The NFL is a game of big plays and playmakers. It's sort of the opposite of Cooper DeJean that we talked about yesterday, where Cooper DeJean is some real questions as to whether or not he can fit in this Jeff Hafley defense and play the man-to-man coverage that we saw very readily apparent with Kool-Aid McKinstry. But DeJean comes up with all these big-time plays and is just this ultimate playmaker. McKinstry is not. So, like, weigh it out. Would you rather have the guy that doesn't fit the scheme quite as well, but has tons of versatility, but in a ton of playmaking? Or do you want the guy that does not have the playmaking, does not have the versatility, but does fit the scheme very well? They're both very good players. They're both first-round grades, in my opinion, just 2 totally different players, and which one Green Bay would potentially value is an interesting conversation to have. As far as that fit and scheme fit, as I said, either outside corner position, scheme versatility in man, zone, press, off coverage, whatever you want to use him as on the outside, he can do, which is very, very valuable. Right now, I think if he were drafted today and you were starting the game this Sunday, I think he would start opposite Jair Alexander. And I really like that tandem. I like the smaller shiftiness and the just sort of click and close and the agility of Jair with a little bit more of the straight line, just bigger, more physical and press sort of mentality of Kool-Aid McKinstry. I think they would make a very nice tandem. Think about playing the Bears. I think Jair plays DJ Moore. McKinstry can play your Keenan Allen. I think it fits very well, and I think they could be a really nice tandem in Green Bay. As I mentioned, fantastic fit for Jeff Hafley's defense, and the fact that you're expecting it to be more man coverage and some more press coverage, which he has done a ton of at Alabama. But if you want to use him in other schemes as well, if you do want to do some cover 2, cover 3, cover 4 off coverage, he can play all of those as well. So very diverse and fits perfectly with what Hafley's going to want to do. Not many people have the man cover skills as McKinstry does coming out of college, which I think will be super valuable to Goot as he looks to build out this Jeff Hafley defense. I don't think he'd be used as a punt returner in Green Bay. I do think he could be used as a jammer on the punt return team, but I don't know how much they'd actually use him as a real punt returner. My final thoughts here. Really have to take into consideration what he was asked to do at Alabama. There's a reason why he gave up some plays. It's because he was on an island, and that's going to happen. But on the whole, his numbers, considering his age and the competition he was going against and what he was asked to do, massively impressive. I do think there's actually a pretty good chance that he's there at pick 25 for Green Bay. The scheme fit is fantastic. He's a premium position. He's a long-term need. He's a short-term need. And the only questions really are, how much is Green Bay concerned about not having the agility scores? The explosive scores are a little bit low, and that overall athleticism is a little bit lacking for what they usually look for. My verdict, for me, he is an end of round 1 grade, right in that 30 to 32 range. Very possible Packers pick. I think he develops into a high-end number 2 or a low-end number 1 corner in the NFL, and I think he'd be an immediate starter opposite Jair Alexander, ahead of Carrington Valentine, ahead of Corey Ballantyne, ahead of Eric Stokes. And then you can figure out what you want to do in the slot if you want to get Jair or Valentine some snaps there, if it's just going to be Keyshawn Nixon's spot. That's going to do it for me today. Hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll be right back here tomorrow with an all-new one. Shout out to our Hall of Fame and All-Pro members, Most Hated Minnesotan, PJ Wynn, John Wild, Shea Dad, Brandon Paletta, Jennifer Wright, Boom Handle, Donald Lee, Lori Lord, Baby QB, David McCluskey, Donald Decker, Bremen, David Prendergast, and Dan Miller. See you guys tomorrow. Until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.